Welcome to The Perspective. I am Jeremy Siregar. Today we will be discussing Indonesian art, which entails various artistic expressions, including both old age art movements and the more modern styles contemporary art. Highlighting these artworks is the recently opened Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Nusantara, or better known as Museum Macan. Here with us today is the director of Museum Macan, Mr. Aaron Seeto. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. I understand that prior to your time as director in Museum Macan, you spent actually quite some time back in Australia, Queensland, as the head of Asian art in the Queensland Art Gallery. You've spent a lot of time, a lot of dedication into the arts industry. What's the inspiration behind that?
Well, you're right. Most of my professional career has been in the arts. It's actually specifically in looking at contemporary Asian art.
Okay.
And I think one of the reasons why is that firstly, I believe that art is very important to people's daily lives.
Right.
It helps us to understand the world around us better. And I was particularly drawn to contemporary Asian art because it's an area in the world art movements which really tells us a lot about where we're living now. I mean, we live here in the Asia Pacific region. It's really important to understand and to think about these areas very deeply.
Okay, and then why specifically Asian contemporary arts? What draws you more to the Asian side of contemporary arts and not necessarily the Western side?
Sure. I mean, growing up in Australia, you become very conscious that you're an Asian person living in Australia.
Right. Okay.
And so it's really something that I was drawn to try and better understand what was going on around me. But also more specifically, Asia has undergone such a wide range of transformations, cultural, social, economic transformations over the last 20 years. And this is something which is fascinating to look at through the eyes of artists.
Right.
You get to learn and understand these things in very, very different ways when you work with artists.
Right. And then you said that Asia has been evolving, progressing, developing throughout the decades. Do you think that art contributes to that as well, rather than just depicting what's happening? Does art contribute to the change as well?
Of course it does. I mean, artists live in the communities around us.
Right.
So it's not as if they make work in a bubble. But there's conversations that happen across the visual arts, into literature, into cinema, into popular culture.
Right.
And so there's a backwards and forwards that always happens. And not only are artists reflecting the world around them, but they're also contributing to it. So that's there is that to and fro.
Right. Is there a specific person that you look up to that inspires you to sort of keep going in the art industry?
Well, I think that, when I think about my very early experiences with art, I came from a family that didn't visit a museum.
Okay.
It wasn't really part of our leisure activity. So actually, the person who really introduced me to the world of art was a high school teacher. Okay. And through their encouragement, I was able to understand that there's a completely different world of knowledge out there that you could tap into through looking at paintings and through looking at performances and installations. So it's actually that education space which is very important to my own development, and which I think that now as somebody working in the arts that I have a responsibility to help encourage as well, to help teachers who might provide those really transformative experiences for young people, whether or not they become curators or museum directors in the future. There's still a role for the arts and for all kinds of people.
Right, and then does that goal of yours, does that translate into Museum Macan? Since it's a new museum in Indonesia, the first modern and contemporary arts museum in Indonesia. Does your goal in some ways translate to your position or this Museum Macan?
Of course. That's one of the core functions of the museum is education. So we have a commitment to education for children through to adults. We really want to be a space where people feel that they can learn about the world around them, and that is seen in our program in a number of ways. I mean, we opened earlier this
month,
yeah.
Okay.
And one of the first things that we did is that we welcomed a whole bunch of school children from local schools into the museum, and we will continue to do this. Provide resources for teachers, provide access to the collection for young kids. The education is a really important foundation for the museum.
Okay, and then walk me through the process of curating artworks for Museum Macan.
Well, firstly, the museum has a fascinating collection. The founder of the museum has lent to us about 800 works. 800
works.
In our first exhibition, there's only 90 works on display. So museums will never be able to present their entire 100% of their collections at any one time. And so the process of selection is one where we rely on scholarly research. So we work with both our internal curatorial teams, and we also work with curators and researchers outside of the museum. We want to create displays which are not only look good, but where people can learn about the history of art. And in this particular exhibition, our first exhibition called Art Turns, World Turns, people can see the history of Indonesian art and the relationship between artists and the emergence of the Indonesian nation. Indonesia has a really interesting art history in that sense, because these ideas, the artists become so intertwined and so involved with the broader political and independence movements.
Right. Our Indonesian artists, as you say, does not just only create art for the beauty of it, but they also have meanings behind it.
Of course.
And a lot of these artworks in Museum Macan shows that. What are some of the examples?
Well, so firstly, the exhibition starts at the late colonial period, when Indonesia was a colony of the Dutch. So we're looking through Raden Saleh, one of the very important painters of the period. We're looking at the relationship between the Dutch colonial government and the colonized. So we can draw out from looking at these paintings some of the complexities of that period, and then we go through the drive for independence. So key artists like Sugiono, for instance, who and we have some really great examples of his work. And then we look further along into the post-independence period, where there are a lot of discussions and arguments around abstraction and figuration.
Right. So it progresses. It doesn't just show you one specific point of history in Indonesia, but it progresses from way in the colonial time up until now. That's interesting, and we'll talk more about that when we come back from the break. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us on The Perspective.